Welcome to the program today, Fred. I'm looking forward to our chat.
Thank you, Simon. I am too. Glad to be here.
I always start by asking people, how did you come to Treasury and what made you choose Treasury as your career?
Sure thing. So I studied economics and international relations in undergrad. I guess I was attracted to the rationale behind economics and to the global orientation of international relations. I think I had in mind that I wanted to do something in finance broadly, and I wanted to do it in an international domain. I certainly didn't start out with any plan to join corporate treasury, and for that matter, I don't think I even knew what corporate treasury really meant. I happened, sort of through happenstance, to land in a dealing room, and I started out doing FX sales and trading, which is a pretty riveting thing to do, to sort of end the day, either feeling like a genius or an idiot. But it was through conversations with corporate clients on the sales side that I kind of got a glimpse into the application of finance more broadly within the business realm. And that, I think, really opened up my eyes to a lot of possibilities. And so it was really that prompted me to pursue an MBA and then to pivot my career into that of more of a corporate practitioner.
So just for the purposes of the listeners, you started in FX sales in Saudi Arabia, did an MBA with NYU Stern, and then moved to Lucent Technologies for 8 years. You then had a couple of years with Constellation Energy as the assistant treasurer, and then the last 11 years with Hilton Worldwide as the treasurer. And you're also on the board of the IFP for the last 18 months. So in terms of that career, Fred, what would you say have been some of the highlights so far?
Yeah, I think every point along the way has had its moments, certainly. I've seen highs and lows in every company I've worked for, and each one has had value. The time I spent with Lucent was certainly a lot of fun. We got to implement, I think, some tremendous changes within Treasury that made a difference for the company, and that I think set some standards in various areas. We were, I think, really pushing envelopes in terms of stuff like in-house banking and FX risk management. That was a lot of fun. Really just kind of applying the rules of the dealing room into a corporate treasury environment. But my time at Hilton for the last 11 years or so has really been remarkable. I've been fortunate to be part of the company during what's been a tremendous period of change along its journey from private back to public, through its second IPO, through 2 massive spinoffs, and then becoming the best company to work for in the US for 2 years running. It's really been awe-inspiring to work alongside some of the brightest minds in the industry, and to really watch what's been a great turnaround in modern corporate history. I think where we find ourselves today in the world is equally awe-inspiring. Certainly, none of us, in this company, this industry, or in any other, imagined where we would find ourselves today. And every downside model, I'm sure, out there pales in comparison to the reality of the world today. But that in and of itself has been a tremendous lesson in risk management. It really, if you take away anything from this, it's an appreciation of the absolute limitations that we have ourselves in being able to understand the true meaning of risk.
100%. I mean, it's one of those bizarre things, isn't it, that there's just no way anyone would have stress tested the situation that we're in right now.
Yeah, I mean, except of course for those who work in epidemiology or
Yes.
for those who write scripts for zombie movies. I think those were the only folks that were ahead of that curve.
Absolutely. And I mean, you've worked across a number of industries within your career, Fred. What would you say, how does Treasury differ between those industries and what Treasury is sort of focused on?
Yeah, I would say it really doesn't differ. What does differ are the circumstances. So is a company high growth or stable? Is it high leverage or low? Is it high margin? What's the size, the scope, the scale of operations? Is it centralized or decentralized? And kind of where is it on its own evolutionary journey? I mean, these are all variables in the grand scheme of things. And if you think of that as like one giant algorithm, the rules of optimizing that algorithm really are the same. I mean, it's the same principles of managing liquidity, managing risk, managing funding, managing operations. I would say the one lesson learned is every single company out there runs on the same thing, which is cash. And some companies tend to forget that from time to time and eventually are reminded of it. But ultimately, that's what Treasury is about. And that's a constant across everything. I guess outside of sort of the nuts and bolts of what Treasury does, the other key variable that does vary across companies is people. And it really comes down to the capacity for change that different people have. I mean, business cycles come and go, companies grow and shrink, but ultimately what makes or breaks in terms of longevity of an organization is the people.
Totally agree with you. Just to touch back on your early career, you were in banking to start with, and then you've moved across to the corporate side. How easy was it making that move, and what advice do you have for the listeners around making that move from banking to corporate?
Yeah, I mean, it really does just come down to personality and interest. I mean, it's a question of, either you're either selling financial goods and services or you're buying them. You're either driving top line or you're saving the bottom line. So a bit of it is sort of personality. Do you consider yourself more of a persuader or a decider? I've seen lots of people successfully make that switch in each direction, and I think it certainly can be done. And frankly, I think it makes for better, more well-rounded professionals on each side, whichever one you land up on. But ultimately, I think it comes down to sort of, personality and interest.
I think that's a really good way of looking at it, actually. I've never had someone explain it that way. Everyone tends to get a little bit more hung up on the fact that you're a salesperson or you're a doer. So I've never heard it spun that way. I really like that. What would you say, what advice would you have, and how have you approached networking throughout your career, Fred?
Yeah, I would say certainly one lesson learned is never underestimate the value of networking. To be a little bit crass about it, it is a bit of a numbers game, because you never know which relationship is going to lead to the next job opportunity, or which relationship is going to lead to some sort of, business prospect, or is going to open up some other door. So it's, you never know kind of who's going to bring what value, which is why it's important to kind of get out there and meet as many people as possible. For that matter, every interaction you have out there helps inform the next. And so as you think about it, if networking is a skill, the more you do it, the better you get. So, it's a key lesson learned is to get out there and be part of those conversations. The other side to it, though, is you never know what value you're going to provide for someone else. And that in and of itself is important. I mean, it's sort of an investment of personal capital to kind of, be the person making connections for others too, and that sort of increases your own value, if not immediately, down the road. So absolutely an important part in terms of career progression.
And I would imagine that your role on the IFP board over the last 18 months, you've probably seen a lot more of that firsthand, both helping people and, meeting more people.
Absolutely. I mean, I've had the great opportunity to sit on the board now with a number of other really smart people from various roles and various industries, who have, been of value in opening doors, sort of big and small. I mean, even just kind of sharing perspectives on what they do day to day really helps inform my own view in terms of the value I can bring to my organization, and vice versa. So it's a tremendous and valuable opportunity in terms of knowledge sharing.
In terms of mentors, Fred, have they been involved in your career, and how have they helped out?
Yeah, I certainly have had the opportunity to work with a number of really smart and talented people for a number of years, and really, talent. I mean, in diverse ways. I mean, people who have been really smart, sort of technically and managerially and leadership wise. And from each one of those people, I'd like to say that I took something away. I think from every person that you interact with in any substance, there's something to be learned. And, for that matter, none of us are perfect. And part of what you learn from someone, it's not just what they've done well. You learn from others' shortcomings and others' missteps. And I think as I think about my own role as a leader, we should realize that we are just as likely to make a mistake as anyone else is. And I think the best thing that we can do as leaders and mentees or mentors is to acknowledge that and to point them out so that our own mentees can benefit from our experience.
Very much so. And I think what a lot of the younger people probably don't realize is, it's not a bad thing to make a mistake, but B, you tend to learn the most from when you do have a career blip, or when something goes wrong in your job. It's where you learn the most from. You don't think it at the time because it feels like it's a misstep and the world's going to end. But at the same time, it is generally where you sort of grow the most.
Absolutely. I mean, if you're not making any mistakes, you're not taking enough risk. And if you're not doing that, you're not going to learn and you're not going to grow. So I absolutely agree. I mean, it's important to take smart and sensible risks. And when you make a mistake, it's important to learn from it and to react to it.
And even to some degree, like the COVID-19 situation that we're in, as hard as it is going through it, people are learning so much so quickly. You're getting like a year's worth of experience in a week. It's amazing.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, it's, there's nothing like a crisis to sort of sharpen the mind and sharpen the resolve.
Now, you've made it to the treasurer role in your career, Fred. If you were back at 25 again and sort of in the early part of your career, what's the one thing that you really wish someone told you, or the piece of advice you think is valuable for the listeners that are at that stage of their career?
Yeah, the one thing I would say to myself at 25 and to anyone else for that matter is to diversify, to sort of experience as many things as you can as early in your career. And that is assuming that you want to sort of grow into some sort of leadership role. And depth in any field is ultimately a commodity that can be bought or procured somehow, whereas breadth is really what makes a leader effective. And that's something that can only be grown over time. I would say, work with as many different people as you can as well. Back to the point about mentees and mentors, there's only so much that one person can teach another. And so there's a lot to be said for working for a lot of different bosses over time and with different characters and strengths and weaknesses themselves. That's how you're going to learn and grow. The other point I would add in terms of advice is, over the course of one's career, you're going to experience periods of stability and periods of turmoil, and that's something we're all learning right now. There's, as you just said, there's a lot to be learned from turmoil. I will say, if you have the opportunity, it's best done early in your career. But in the end, you have to be able to adapt to both types of situations.
And I think that the tumultuous situation is one that you look back like 5 years or 10 years down the track. And I know I can say it, from my personal experience, it was a pivotal moment in my time. But it was the best thing that could have happened to me is to shake me a little bit and make me, pivot and go down a different path. So I totally agree. And, again, speaking from personal experience, I think it's good to go through that, even though you don't think it at the time.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, it's, you need to be shaken up every once in a while. And if you don't shake yourself up, eventually the world will do it to you.
Absolutely. What are the key things you look for, Fred, when you're hiring in your direct reports?
Yeah, a couple of things. Number one, I would say, is adaptability. Someone who can sort of roll with the punches, deal with good times and bad, and that applies both to sort of, functional, technical aspects, business cycles, but also sort of human and personal issues as well. circumstances and the environment will change, and you need somebody who can sort of deal with the highs and lows of it. Another issue that I would look for is managerial courage. I would say is sort of the ability or the willingness to kind of stand up and say what needs to be said. I mean, from my own team, I expect members of my own team at all levels to push back, and others to challenge the norms, to challenge the assumptions that have been there for years, and frankly, to challenge me, when I say something that needs to be challenged. I mean, ultimately, the workplace is not a democracy, but if it's a dictatorship, it should be at least a very informed one, and that comes from the views of not only one person, but from the whole team. And then a third and maybe most important issue is, you could call it empathy, but I think, along with that is communication and presence and all other facets of just being a good and effective human being. Ultimately, you'd like to believe that lots of people can be good with numbers. I think the real test of a future leader, and so, thinking about the direct reports here, the real test of a future leader is someone who's good with people.
Absolutely. I mean, it's a skill that's hard to train as well. Like, you can train it, but I think a lot of your leadership attributes are part of your personality, aren't they?
Absolutely. It is. I would completely agree. You'd like to think that you can train it. I think the sooner you start, the better. And I think a lot of times that starts in kindergarten.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, it's one of those things that you can definitely improve. But I think there are definitely certain personalities that are not built to be in those type of roles. So, yeah, I'd agree with you there. Fred, what do you think makes a successful treasurer in the eyes of the CFO, the CEO, and the board?
So I think at that level, you would really want to know that someone has the experience for the task ahead. In other words, whatever the road is. And so go back to the point of there's different companies that have different needs and are different points of their sort of life cycle. You'd like to know that a treasurer or anyone at that level has kind of been down that path before. I think, a successful treasurer is someone who can understand the financial needs of the company and understand the business environment that it's operating in and adapt when as appropriate. Back to the point about if Treasury ultimately is an algorithm, which I kind of think it is, it's a question of that algorithm needs to be configured and adapted for the circumstances at hand. And I think the treasurer who is successful will stay true to the principles underlying that algorithm. But then again, to tie it back to the point earlier, the successful treasurer, aside from being able to kind of manipulate that optimization algorithm, fundamentally still needs to be good with people, because without people, that machine doesn't run itself.
Absolutely. Now, technology is changing rapidly, Fred. How do you see the role of the treasurer changing in the next few years?
Yeah, I think treasurers absolutely have to be technically literate. I think years ago, it might have been more about what can we do to squeeze out efficiencies here through process automation and, trim a few dollars off the bottom line. But I think, the landscape is changing, and technology is fundamentally changing our assumptions with respect to lots of things. So risk and security, which can be enterprise threatening in some environments. It's changing how companies engage with their customers, whether that's payments or commercial flow, and it's changing the competitive landscape and changing how companies respond with respect to suppliers and customers. So any treasurer who wants to be part of that strategic value proposition to the company needs to stay ahead of that curve.
Very interesting. And I think being ahead of that curve it's the unknown, isn't it? That's the piece that you've just got to take advice from your advisors and be on top of things to know what's coming next.
Yeah, absolutely. And it does, I think underlying that is the recognition of limitations of what you know going into it. And you have to be kind of willing to learn and willing to adapt.
Fred, it's been a pleasure chatting today. Thank you very much for your insight. You've definitely got some angles on things that I've not heard before, which is really refreshing. So thank you very much for your time.
Well, thank you very much, Simon. I've really enjoyed it.